There are moments in life that make everything stop. Time slows down, the air turns thick, and everyone in the room forgets to breathe. This was one of those moments. A sharp, echoing slap rang through the luxury retail store, so loud, so sudden, that it silenced every voice, every footstep, every thought. All eyes turned toward the center of the chaos, where a white woman, clearly the store manager, stood trembling with rage, her hand still raised. In front of her was a calm, composed black woman, older, elegant, and heartbreakingly quiet. Her cheek was red from the impact, but her face didn't break. No tears, no screams, no anger, just silence, and then something that chilled the entire store. She smiled, but not the kind of smile anyone expected. It wasn't a sad smile. It wasn't a fake, polite smile either. It was a knowing smile, a cold, almost amused expression, like someone who had already written the ending to the story and knew that nobody else had read that page yet. The crowd of customers, employees, and even security froze. The energy in the room had shifted. It had been a storm of mockery, of judgment, of whispers and laughter. But now, something had changed. Something felt off, dangerous even. And the person standing at the center of it, the woman who had just been slapped in public, was the calmest of them all. Her name was Diana Williams. And no one in that store knew who she really was. Yet, the slap didn't happen in isolation. It was a result of a long chain of moments, of prejudice, of assumptions, of silent nods and cruel chuckles. It was the climax of an 8-hour descent into madness that had begun early that morning. And before we go any further, before we talk about the fall of the store manager, the shock of the crowd, and the collapse of an entire team of employees, before the lawyers, the black SUVs, and the corporate bombshell that ended it all, we need to go back. Just 8 hours. Just before the storm began. It was 7:48 a.m. The store hadn't opened yet, but the staff was already preparing for the day. They called it Store 47, a prestigious branch of one of the country's most luxurious retail chains, Prestige Collections. This was where the wealthy shopped for silk scarves, for $1,000 dresses, and diamond-studded accessories. This store didn't advertise in newspapers. It didn't need to. Its customers knew it by name, and that was enough. Inside, the manager, Brittany Anderson, was already barking orders. Amber cleaned the glass cases. Maria double-checked the VIP dress inventory. Tyler, keep an eye on the cameras today. We're not dealing with any nonsense. Brittany was a 42-year-old blonde woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She had been managing the store for over a decade. Her reputation among staff was complicated. Some feared her, some respected her, but most just kept their heads down. To Brittany, the store wasn't just a job. It was her stage, and she ruled it like a queen. But behind the power suits and expensive perfume was a deeply insecure woman. Brittany had come from a middle-class family. She had worked her way up the retail ladder from cashier to manager, but in doing so, she had developed a hard shell. She judged customers by how they looked, how they walked, what they wore, and most importantly, how much they looked like they could spend. If you didn't match her idea of quality clientele, you were treated like an invader. And today, an invader was coming. At 8:12 a.m., a woman entered the store. She wore worn-out jeans, a faded sweater, and sneakers that had seen better days. Her natural hair was tied back neatly. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp, watching everything, observing. The moment she walked in, Brittany noticed. She didn't like what she saw. This woman didn't look rich. She didn't carry designer bags or wear expensive makeup. She looked like someone who had wandered in from a discount store. Brittany's lips tightened. She marched across the marble floor, heels clicking like a metronome of judgment. "Excuse me, miss," Brittany said with a tight smile. "Can I help you find a thrift store? It's a few blocks down the road." The woman looked at her, unbothered. "No," she said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Something about the way she said it made Brittany pause, but only for a second. "Well," Brittany continued, "we're not open for browsing. This is a high-end boutique. If you're just looking, I suggest somewhere else. We're quite exclusive." The woman didn't argue. She simply walked over to the handbag section and examined a black leather purse. Brittany followed, now visibly irritated. She didn't like being ignored. More than that, she didn't like being challenged by someone she had already decided was beneath the brand. A few customers had trickled in by now, regulars who spent thousands each month. One of them, Helen Carter, an older woman in designer heels, was already watching with interest. "Is she bothering you, Brittany?" Helen asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Not at all," Brittany replied loud enough for others to hear. "Just trying to be helpful. Some people don't understand the kind of store this is." It was said with a laugh, just a little joke. But it wasn't funny. It was a warning. The woman still said nothing. She moved the jewelry case. She leaned in, examining the way the items were displayed. To everyone else, it looked like curiosity, but Diana was taking notes. Mental notes about the store's layout, about the product placement, about the customer service, or lack of it. Brittany's patience was running out. "You know," she said louder, "some of these items cost more than most people's monthly rent. I wouldn't want you to get too excited and disappointed." A few nearby customers chuckled, but the woman didn't even blink. She just looked up and said, "Thank you for the warning." The passive tone drove Brittany wild, and so she escalated. "Actually," she said, "I'll need to ask you to leave. We have policies about loitering. And quite frankly, you're making some of our valued customers uncomfortable." A man nearby nodded in agreement. Helen Carter smiled wider. That's when Diana Williams did something that would start a storm unlike anything the store had ever seen. She asked to try on a dress. Not just any dress, but $4,000 designer gown from the VIP collection. Brittany's eyes lit up like she had found her final excuse. "Oh," she said, loudly now so the growing number of customers could hear. "You want to try on that dress? Are you sure you're in the right store?" And then came the cruelest line of all. "Honey, that dress costs more than your entire wardrobe." There were gasps. A few people laughed. One even clapped quietly. Diana stood still, calm, unbothered. The smile was gone now, but her silence was louder than anything anyone else could say. Then Brittany, feeding off the crowd, raised her voice. "Security," she called out. "Escort this woman out before she breaks something she can't afford." Carlos Rivera, the store security guard, started moving, and that's when Brittany lost control. She raised her hand, and she slapped Diana Williams across the face. Everything stopped. Nobody knew yet that the woman they had just laughed at, insulted, judged, and physically assaulted owned the entire company. But they were about to find out, because Diana wasn't just a shopper. She was the billionaire behind the entire Prestige Collections empire, and she was done being silent. "Yes, that store. The one we received complaints about." There was silence for a beat as he responded with concern. "No, James," she said firmly. "This isn't about a customer complaint. This is bigger. Bring the documentation of ownership. Bring the legal team. And James, bring the full security feed." Another pause. "Yes, the entire recording of today. From the moment I walked in. I want it secure before anyone tries to erase it." She ended the call. Behind her, through the fixed storefront glass, she could see Brittany laughing with customers, holding court, glowing with confidence, probably telling the story of the woman who didn't belong. She had no idea the woman she slapped wasn't just any customer. She had just struck the founder, owner, and CEO of the company, and her celebration would soon become the worst moment of her life. Diana didn't go back in. She stood by her 10-year-old Honda Civic, leaned against the driver's side door and watched. Every person inside that store, their faces, their names, their words, were etched into her memory now. And then she whispered something under her breath. Words that would carry into the next chapter of this story like a silent promise. Let's see how they treat the real customers when the owner arrives. Inside store 47, laughter was still floating through the air like perfume. The slap had been shocking, yes, but now it was already morphing into a story. A tale to be retold, embellished, and glamorized. Brittany Anderson, the manager, was glowing. She stood near the front counter, basking in the energy of what she believed was a job well done. Her perfectly painted nails gripped a champagne glass that had been retrieved from the back office, and she clinked it gently against another. To standards, she toasted, smiling confidently. To protecting the image of the store. Customers around her clapped. Some nodded with admiration. They thought they had just watched something important. A woman defending her store from disruption. But what they had actually witnessed was cruelty dressed as professionalism, discrimination masked as policy. And it was only a matter of time before that truth shattered the glass bubble they had built around themselves. Tyler Brooks, always loyal, raised his glass too. You handled that with class, Brittany. Maria Gonzalez, still behind the counter, forced a smile but said nothing. Inside, she was trembling. Her hands were wet with nervous sweat as she arranged gift bags and receipts. She didn't believe in what she had just witnessed, but she needed this job more than she needed to speak up. Her son had asthma. He needed his medication. Her rent was already overdue. She couldn't afford to have morals right now. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. Amber Davis, the youngest staff member, whispered excitedly to another associate. That woman was so bold. Like, who comes in here dressed like that? Brittany was totally right to check her. Her voice was high and fast, like a fan at a concert. She truly believed she had witnessed greatness. She saw Brittany not as a boss, but as a role model. Helen Carter, holding her leather purse that cost more than a family's month of groceries, spoke up again. I tell you what, if Brittany doesn't get promoted after this, something's wrong with this company. Oh, how wrong she was. Because just outside, leaning against her old car in the parking lot, Diana Williams was making moves that would upend all their lives. She wasn't just planning a response. She was executing a strategy, calmly, professionally, like she had done when building every piece of the $3 billion empire she now owned. She had hired thousands, rescued failing stores, acquired competition. She had been in rooms with presidents and prime ministers. She had been doubted before. But this time was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. She looked at the time, 3:32 p.m. 15 minutes, she said softly to herself. That's all it would take. Just 15 minutes before the quiet parking lot filled with engines and blacked-out windows and leather folders. 15 minutes before this illusion of perfection would fall apart in front of everyone's eyes. Inside the store, Brittany was still riding high. She was telling the story again, louder this time, for some new customers who had walked in. She used dramatic hand gestures, exaggerated tones, and smug little laughs. She walked in like she was about to buy the store. Can you believe that? Worn sneakers, old jeans. Like, ma'am, what are you even doing here? More laughter. No one questioned her. No one challenged her version of events. This was what she had built over the years. A team that never pushed back, customers who followed her cues, a store culture where image was everything and humility was weakness. She had turned Prestige Collection Store 47 into her personal kingdom, and today she had ruled it with fire and pride. But that rule was about to end. At 3:45 p.m. sharp, the sound of tires on pavement caught the attention of some customers near the windows. 3 large black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. They weren't flashy, but they weren't subtle either. They didn't belong to shoppers. No designer bags came out of them. Instead, when the doors opened, suits stepped out. Clipboard holders, security consultants, legal experts. And behind them, stepping out last, was Rachel Stone, head of human resources. She had been with the company for over 2 decades. She didn't believe in gossip. She didn't deal in emotion. She dealt in results, law, and documentation. If she showed up in your store unannounced, it meant something big was happening. Michael Torres, head of legal affairs, stepped beside her. Sarah Chun, chief operating officer, was right behind them. David Kim, director of security, was already checking his watch and giving hand signals to the guards. A storm had arrived. Inside the store, some customers noticed the activity. They stopped sipping their complimentary champagne. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Brittany, however, was still smiling. She saw the group walking toward the door, and her first thought was praise. She thought they were there to recognize her, to commend her for her excellent leadership. She even adjusted her blouse and smoothed down her hair before walking to greet them. "Welcome," she said cheerfully as they entered. "You must have heard about the incident earlier. Don't worry, I handled everything." Rachel Stone didn't smile. She scanned the store, her eyes taking in half-empty glasses, the staff's nervous expressions, the crowd of wealthy customers standing in a semicircle like spectators. Then her eyes fell on Brittany. "I presume you're Brittany Anderson," she said. "Yes, that's me," Brittany replied proudly. "Store manager for 12 years. I take great pride in protecting our brand." Rachel gave a slight nod, then turned to Sarah Chun. "Sarah, can you secure the back office? Ensure we retrieve all security footage from today, every camera angle." Brittany blinked. "Wait, that wasn't congratulations." Michael Torres pulled out a small stack of papers. "We're going to need you to walk us through the events of this afternoon, Ms. Anderson, from the moment your store opened to now." "Oh!" Brittany laughed lightly. "Of course, it's all straightforward. We had a situation with a customer who didn't belong here. I handled it as best I could. You can ask anyone here." Helen Carter stepped forward again. "I was here the whole time." She was professional. That woman didn't belong in a store like this. Rachel didn't even acknowledge the comment. She looked directly at Brittany and said, "We'd like to speak to you privately. Now." Something shifted in Brittany's face, a small crack in her confidence. She hesitated, but then nodded, "Of course." As she turned, the last person to walk through the door stepped in. The customers gasped, because the woman who entered was the same woman who had been slapped, laughed at, humiliated, and escorted out just an hour ago. Diana Williams had returned, but now she wasn't dressed in worn-out jeans and sneakers. She wore a sleek black pantsuit, sharp heels, and carried a leather folder in one hand and her phone in the other. Her energy wasn't just calm, it was commanding. And when she stepped in, even the most confident customers stepped back a little. Diana walked straight toward Brittany, and Rachel Stone stepped aside. Brittany's eyes widened. She looked confused, then shocked, then terrified. "You," Brittany whispered. "You came back?" Diana's voice was like steel wrapped in silk. "No, Ms. Anderson," she said. "I didn't come back. I arrived officially." Rachel nodded. "Ms. Anderson, meet Diana Williams, the founder, CEO, and 100% shareholder of Prestige Collections." The silence was absolute. Someone dropped a glass, and the empire Brittany thought she controlled had just shifted hands. The room had gone completely still. A silence so deep, so total, it rang louder than any noise. Every eye was locked on Diana Williams. And in that moment, the elegant black woman who had been slapped, mocked, and thrown out like trash stood at the center of the store with the quiet power of someone who no longer needed to explain anything. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need revenge, because the truth had already done the damage. Brittany Anderson's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face drained of all color as the reality sank in. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a setup. The woman she had humiliated twice wasn't just a customer. She was her boss, her boss's boss, the top of the food chain, the owner of everything, including the very badge on Brittany's chest. Rachel Stone's voice broke the silence like a judge in a courtroom. "Miss Anderson," she said clearly, "I'd advise you to say nothing else until legal is finished with the footage." Brittany looked helplessly at the faces around her, but they weren't on her side anymore. Not even close. The very crowd that had clapped for her moments ago now looked away in shame. People who had laughed were suddenly dead quiet. Even Helen Carter, the wealthy customer who had cheered Brittany on, took a step back, her face pale and stunned. Diana's eyes scanned the room slowly. She wasn't angry. She was watching every flinch, every shift in posture, every failed attempt to hide the guilt that had finally surfaced. This wasn't just about Brittany. This was about everyone who had played a role in what happened. Every employee who stayed silent. Every customer who laughed. Every person who looked at her clothes and assumed her worth. The phones were no longer out to record. They were being put away in pockets and purses. Because now it wasn't funny. Now it wasn't entertainment. Now they were the story, and not the good kind. Amber Davis, the young cashier who had been buzzing with excitement an hour ago, looked like a statue. Her face was frozen in a mix of horror and disbelief. She had idolized Brittany, echoed her comments, giggled at the jokes, and now her stomach twisted into knots as she remembered every cruel thing she'd said. Maria Gonzalez stood frozen behind the counter. Her heart was pounding. All she could think about was her son, her job, her future. She had stayed quiet because she was afraid. But now that fear had turned to something else, shame. The kind that crawls into your chest and doesn't leave. Tyler Brooks, the trusted supervisor, the one who had trained under Brittany's watchful eye, cleared his throat and took one small step back. Not out of cowardice, but confusion. He had believed in Brittany, trusted her, supported her. And now, everything he thought he knew was falling apart in front of him. "Shall we begin?" Diana said softly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Michael Torres, the legal director, stepped forward with a folder and handed it to Diana. She opened it without looking and began reading from the first page. "I am Diana Williams, owner of Prestige Collections. Today, I visited Store 47 in response to repeated anonymous complaints, letters, emails, and voicemails about mistreatment, profiling, and toxic leadership within this location. You could hear the shame swallowing the room whole. I chose to come dressed as myself," she continued, "not in designer clothes or diamond heels, but in my natural form, the way my mother taught me to stay grounded, the way I walk through the world when no one is watching. And what I saw here today confirmed everything I feared." Rachel stepped beside her. "We have already secured the security footage. Audio is crystal clear. Every interaction from the moment Miss Williams walked through the door is preserved and backed up on multiple servers." Diana's eyes now focused directly on Brittany. "You slapped your employer in front of customers. You publicly humiliated a stranger based on her appearance. You involved your staff in mocking someone who, by all legal rights, could have fired you on the spot." Brittany tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. I didn't know." Diana raised an eyebrow, gently. "That I was rich? That I owned the store? That I wasn't wearing expensive clothes? Or that I was black?" Brittany flinched like she'd been slapped again. Rachel turned toward the HR team. "Remove her badge." Two security officers stepped forward. With cold professionalism, they took the badge from Brittany's neck and the security key from her hand. She didn't resist. She just stood there, staring into nothing, lost inside the ruins of her collapsing ego. "Effective immediately," Rachel said. "Miss Anderson is terminated from all roles within Prestige Collections and banned from any affiliated store nationwide. All final pay will be held pending legal review of today's events." Brittany looked like she wanted to cry, but even her tears were trapped. But Diana wasn't finished. She turned to the rest of the staff. Her voice was still calm, but firm. "Maria Gonzalez," she said, and the woman gasped. "You stood behind the counter and said nothing. You let this happen. You nodded. You supported it." "I'm sorry," Maria whispered, trembling. "I was scared. I didn't want to lose my job. Please, I have a son." Diana nodded slowly. "I understand. But staying silent during injustice is still complicity." Rachel stepped forward again. "Maria Gonzalez, your employment is terminated." Maria collapsed onto a stool behind her, covering her mouth to muffle the sobs. "Amber Davis," Diana continued. The young woman's legs nearly gave out. "I saw the way you encouraged it, the way you laughed, the way you whispered." Amber burst into tears. "I didn't mean to, I thought I was doing the right thing." Brittany said. "She taught you how to be cruel," Diana replied softly. "But it was your choice to follow." Amber could barely speak. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Rachel stepped forward. "Amber Davis, you're also dismissed. You'll be contacted about the incident documentation." Amber sank to the floor. Diana's gaze now fell on Tyler Brooks. He stood tall but shaken. "You've been here a long time," she said. "You were raised under Brittany's leadership. I saw you back her up, but I also saw hesitation. I saw discomfort. You didn't speak, but you also didn't mock." "I didn't know," Tyler said quietly. "I just thought we were protecting the store's brand. I thought it was right." Diana was silent for a moment. "You're not being fired, but you will be demoted and enrolled in mandatory bias and sensitivity training. If you complete it and rebuild trust, you may find your way again. But this stain will not be ignored." Tyler nodded. No argument, no defense, just regret. And then Diana turned her attention to the customers. "I don't run a company where cruelty is entertainment," she said to them. "And yet, I walked into a room where humiliation became applause." The customers looked around uncomfortably. No one made eye contact. "Every one of you who laughed, who whispered, who watched and did nothing, remember this day, because it may not be me next time, but it will be someone, and how you treat people who look different from you tells the world exactly who you are." A deep silence swallowed the store again. One woman put her bag down and walked toward the exit quietly. A man beside her followed. One by one, customers began leaving, not in protest, but in shame. And Diana stood there, not triumphant, but sad, because no matter how much money she had, no matter how high she climbed, there would always be people who saw her as less because of how she looked. And even when she owned the very walls they stood inside, they still tried to make her feel small. But she had one more message left. Diana Williams stood in the center of Store 47, surrounded by the silence of shame. Not the shame she was meant to feel, but the shame that belonged to everyone else. The customers, the staff, the crowd who once cheered the slap, now stood frozen, avoiding her eyes. The mighty had fallen, but Diana hadn't lifted a single hand. All she had done was walk in, speak the truth, and let their own actions destroy them. But this wasn't about revenge. It never had been. Diana looked around slowly, then walked in front of the store. She turned to face everyone, those who remained inside. She took a deep breath, not to steady herself, but to hold the weight of what she was about to say. "You all watched what happened here today," she began. "Some of you participated. Others stood by. Some of you laughed. Some of you said nothing. But every single one of you will remember this moment for the rest of your lives." Her voice wasn't angry. It was calm, like a teacher speaking to a classroom that had just learned a painful lesson. "You judged me based on my clothes, my shoes, my hair, and the color of my skin. You assumed I had no money, no class, no right to be here. You decided, without knowing me, that I wasn't good enough to walk on this marble floor." She paused, letting her words settle like dust on a quiet room. "I was treated like garbage in a store I built with my own hands." Gasps filled the room. A few staff members looked like they were about to cry again. Diana's voice grew softer, not louder, but her words hit harder than any slap could. "When I started Prestige Collections, I was broke. I didn't inherit a penny. I worked 2 jobs, slept on floors. My first boutique was a 400-square-foot shop with secondhand shelves. I didn't build this company to make rich people richer. I built it to make everyone feel worthy, seen, beautiful." Her eyes scanned the crowd again. "But today, I walked into one of my own stores and was treated like I was worthless. And the people I pay, the people I trusted to carry this company's mission, failed me deeply." She turned her gaze to the remaining employees, the ones still hiding behind the counter, the ones pretending to organize racks to avoid her stare. "You didn't just fail me," she said. "You failed yourselves." Rachel Stone, still standing nearby, looked on silently. Even she, as head of HR, had rarely seen Diana speak like this. This wasn't business. This was personal. This store, Diana said, is about to change. Everything, from how we greet people to how we judge who deserves respect. A man in the back asked timidly, "What does that mean?" "It means," Diana replied, "this store is closed, effective immediately." Shocked gasps echoed across the room. For the next 7 days, Store 47 will not open. Not for VIPs. Not for walk-ins. Not for anyone. Because this store doesn't need more customers. It needs a soul. She walked toward the counter, set her leather folder down, and opened it. Inside were printed reports, complaints, footage logs, testimony. These complaints, she said, holding up the papers, weren't new. They came over months. And I gave management here the benefit of the doubt. I didn't want to believe one of my most profitable locations had turned into a place of exclusion and cruelty. Her voice didn't rise, but her pain became clearer. But now I've seen it for myself. She handed the folder to Rachel. I want mandatory cultural retraining for every location, not just this one. I want monthly mystery audits, but not the kind where people come in with clipboards. I want real people. Black, white, Asian, Latin, poor, rich, disabled, LGBTQ, teenagers, seniors, mothers, veterans. I want to see how they're treated when no one knows who they are. One of the remaining staff members whispered, "You're serious?" Diana turned to her. "I don't play dress-up to teach people lessons. I came here because people like Brittany have forgotten why this store exists. And I'm here to remind you." She turned to the exit and nodded at Rachel. "I want this store deep cleaned. Not just the floor, but the energy." Rachel nodded without question, and then Diana paused. There was still one thing left to say. She turned to the camera mounted in the corner of the store. To every person watching this online, because I know the footage will be shared, she said, "Remember this. Respect isn't based on income. Dignity isn't earned by a credit score. And someone's clothes don't tell you anything about their character." She gave the camera a small, firm smile. "If you're ever in a place that makes you feel small for simply existing, leave. Not because you don't belong, but because they don't deserve you." With that, she turned and walked toward the glass doors, now surrounded by stunned silence. Just before leaving, she looked over her shoulder. "I'll be back in 7 days," she said. "Let's see who's still standing." And then she stepped out. Gone was the woman they laughed at. Now, all they could see was a leader, a woman they had tried to erase, who had come back stronger than anyone could have imagined by the time Diana Williams stepped into her car and quietly drove away. The entire world had already begun to hear about what had happened inside Store 47. It started with a single post, a shaky video, only 18 seconds long. It showed the slap, the silence, the smirk on Brittany's face, and the calm smile from Diana in return. No one knew yet who Diana really was, but the clip went viral within 2 hours. By the 5th hour, it had over 6 million views. By midnight, major news outlets were calling it the slap heard around the world. The hashtags were everywhere. Hashtag justice for Diana. Hashtag racist retail exposed. Hashtag she owns the store. TikTok users dissected every frame. Twitter users started tagging big brands. Facebook comments exploded with outrage. Instagram influencers started sharing posts demanding that the company respond publicly. And although Diana hadn't released a single statement, her silence only added to the fire. People didn't just see a woman being slapped. They saw themselves, their mother, their sister, their friend, someone who had been judged unfairly, someone who had been dismissed because of how they looked. And then, when the reveal came that the woman slapped wasn't just a customer, but the owner of the store, everything changed again. Outrage turned to astonishment. That twist was unlike anything anyone expected. It was poetic justice in real time. One headline read, "Billionaire walks into her own store in old sneakers. Manager slaps her for not belonging." Another said, "She got slapped. Then she shut down the store. The owner nobody saw coming." Talk shows, podcasts, news anchors, bloggers. Everyone was talking about Diana Williams. But what made her different from other billionaires was how she handled it. There was no dramatic press conference, no fiery Instagram video, no $1 million lawsuit. She said nothing. And yet, the silence screamed louder than anything else. While the internet roared, Store 47 remained shuttered, its doors locked, its windows dark, A handwritten sign taped to the glass simply said, "Closed for internal restoration." Inside, the place felt haunted. The perfume was gone. The lights were off, and the walls echoed with what had once been cruel laughter. Brittany Anderson, now completely fired and banned from every prestige collection store, had disappeared from public view, but the internet wasn't letting her hide. Her face was everywhere. Her quotes, her smirks, her "sweetie, this isn't a thrift store" line, shared, stitched, and reposted thousands of times. She tried to make a statement on her personal social media, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she didn't know who Diana was. But the public had no sympathy, because that was the whole point. You shouldn't have to be a billionaire to be treated like a human being. Comments under Brittany's post tore her apart. You slapped a stranger for not looking rich. That's who you are. Imagine how many people she's treated like this before. Diana just happened to have the power to end it. The world doesn't need managers like Brittany. It needs more leaders like Diana. Her followers dropped by the thousands. Her LinkedIn page was flooded with messages calling her out. Companies she used to name drop issued statements distancing themselves from her behavior. Meanwhile, Diana's name became a symbol. Diana Williams was now more than CEO. She was a lesson. Prestige Collections' official channels finally broke their silence 48 hours later. The statement was short, respectful, and clearly written by someone who understood the weight of what had happened. "We are heartbroken by what occurred at Store 47. Prestige Collection stands for dignity, inclusion, and excellence. We are grateful for Ms. Diana Williams' leadership and for the changes she is committed to implementing across all our locations." But even before that message was posted, people had already made up their minds. They had chosen their side, and they were on Diana's. In neighborhoods across the country, people walked into their local prestige stores, not to shop, but to look, to test, to see if the culture was different now. And in many places it was. Store managers were nervous. Employees were extra careful. Smiles were more genuine, because they knew they were being watched. Change had begun, but the most surprising impact wasn't in the corporate office. It was in people's hearts. Amber Davis, the 24-year-old cashier who had once giggled behind the counter, sat alone in her small apartment, reading comments under a clip of her own voice laughing. She could hear herself say, "She probably takes the bus." Now, she couldn't believe she'd said it. The shame sat heavy on her chest. And for the first time in her life, she realized she hadn't been a victim of someone else's cruelty. She had participated in it. Amber deleted all her social media that night, and then she wrote a letter, not for the public, not for likes, but for Diana. It read, "I judged you. I laughed. I wanted approval from someone cruel, and I hurt someone kind. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm not proud of who I was in that moment, but I'll spend every day becoming better than that girl at the register." She didn't know if Diana would ever read it, but writing it was the beginning of her change. Meanwhile, Maria Gonzalez sat at her kitchen table, holding her son's hand as she scrolled through articles on her phone. She had just been offered a new job, not in fashion, not in sales, but as a community outreach coordinator for a nonprofit Diana had quietly funded for years. Maria had received a message earlier that morning. Sometimes good people are stuck in bad systems. Let's build something better. She cried for a full 10 minutes after reading it, because Diana hadn't fired her to punish her. She had fired her to free her. Tyler Brooks, who had been demoted and ordered to attend bias training, didn't resist. He signed up, he listened, he learned, and for the first time in years, he questioned the version of leadership he had believed in. He stopped saying, "I didn't know," and started asking, "What do I know yet?" He, too, began again. But the biggest transformation was still waiting. Because after the world burned with headlines, after the news cycle spun through its outrage, Diana Williams quietly returned to Store 47 on a Thursday morning. No security detail, no media crew, just her and a key. She stood in front of the same glass door where she had once been humiliated and looked up at the store that almost made her forget who she was. But she hadn't forgotten. She had remembered everything. And now, she was here to rebuild. It was Thursday morning. The sun was gentle, the sky clear, and standing quietly outside the glass door of Store 47 was the same woman who had once been slapped, mocked, and laughed at by an entire room. But this time, Diana Williams wasn't here for revenge. She was here to rebuild. In her hand was a single brass key, the original one she had used to open her first ever store, back when she sold handbags from a tiny booth in a borrowed space. It was scratched and old, but it still worked, just like her. Worn on the outside, sharp on the inside. She slid the key into the lock and turned it with a soft click. Store 47 was open again, but it didn't look the same. Gone were the cold marble floors that echoed with judgment. Gone were the oversized portraits of models who looked nothing like the customers. Gone were the empty luxury displays designed to intimidate instead of welcome. Instead, the store smelled of fresh flowers. Soft jazz played overhead. Shelves were filled, not just with designer clothes, but with warmth. New posters lined the walls showing real women of all ages, colors, sizes, and stories. Mothers with their daughters. Grandmothers in bold colors. Young professionals in modest blazers. Teenagers beaming in affordable accessories. A sign near the entrance read, "Style is not a privilege. It's a voice. Everyone deserves to be heard." By 10 a.m., the community began to gather outside, not the regular shoppers who once used the store as a place to feel superior. No, these were people from the neighborhood, single moms, teachers, nurses, students, people who had seen Diana's story online and were curious, inspired, even emotional. The first woman to walk in was in her 60s, wearing her Sunday dress and holding a purse with a broken zipper. She was greeted by a smile. "Welcome," said a new staff member, genuinely. "Can I help you find something that makes you feel like you today?" The woman blinked, then smiled back. "Actually, yes, that's exactly what I need." Outside, a group of college students took selfies in front of the window. "Can you believe this is the same store?" one of them asked. "It doesn't even feel the same." That was the point. Inside, Diana stood beside the new store manager, a woman named Carla Reed. Black, mid-30s, former schoolteacher. She didn't have a fashion degree, but she had something more powerful: empathy. Carla had been handpicked by Diana herself. "This isn't just a retail job," Diana told her. "This is leadership. I want people to walk in and feel human again. Can you protect that?" Carla had nodded firmly. Absolutely. By noon, the store was buzzing, but not with rich clients demanding champagne. It was alive with people who had never felt like they belonged in places like this before. They weren't being watched like suspects. They were being treated like guests. And then Diana walked to the back, where a small group of former employees sat, waiting quietly. Among them was Tyler Brooks. He stood when she entered. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice low, "thank you for giving me another chance." She nodded. "You didn't run from the truth, Tyler. You faced it. That's more than most people ever do." Also seated there, looking nervous, was Maria Gonzalez. She had come not to beg for a job back, but to apologize in person. But Diana surprised her. "I already read your letter," she said. "And I also spoke with a nonprofit director who interviewed you. They were impressed. I think you found a place where your heart matters more than your fear." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for seeing me." "I never stopped," Diana said gently, "even when you didn't see yourself." Amber Davis hadn't shown up that day. She had sent another letter, this time addressed not to Diana, but to Carla, the new manager. In it, she admitted that she wasn't ready to face the store again, but she had enrolled in night classes for social work. She wanted to make sure the next generation learned how to stand up, not stay quiet. Diana smiled when she read it. Sometimes, change didn't happen all at once. Sometimes, it started in silence. At 3 p.m., local news reporters stood outside with cameras, hoping for a comment. Diana stepped outside just long enough to answer one question. A journalist asked, "What would you say to the people who once supported the former manager's behavior?" Diana replied, "People aren't born cruel. They're taught, And that means we can teach them something better. Then she walked back inside. Because for Diana, the real story wasn't the slap or the downfall or even the headlines. The real story was about what came next. And what came next was healing. Diana Williams never planned to become a symbol. She wasn't looking to be a viral story, a trending headline, or a face on the evening news. But sometimes the world chooses your voice for you. And once the truth inside Store 47 had been revealed, the world wasn't just watching, they were listening. In the days after the reopening, something remarkable happened. Letters began pouring into Prestige Collections headquarters. Not complaints, not criticism, but thank yous, thousands of them. Handwritten notes, emails, voice messages, from customers, from former employees, from complete strangers. A letter from a young black girl in Chicago read, "Ms. Diana, my mom always told me I'm beautiful, but stores never made me feel that way. Yours did. Thank you." A former cashier in Atlanta wrote, "I once lost my job for standing up for a customer who looked like she didn't belong. I thought maybe I was wrong, but your story told me I was right all along." Even competitors took notice. Other fashion brands started making internal changes. Quietly but noticeably, staff trainings were updated. Policies were reworded. Leadership teams began having uncomfortable conversations they'd avoided for years, not because of pressure, but because someone had finally shown what real leadership looked like. Dignity was trending, and Diana's inbox was full. Still, she stayed silent in the media. No press interviews, no public appearances. She wanted the focus to stay on the message, not the messenger. She knew what the world was like. People move on fast. Headlines fade. Outrage shifts. But what she wanted was something that would last. So she did something bold. She called an emergency board meeting. All executive heads. No assistants. No filters. They met in a quiet glass conference room with no cameras. Only truth. Diana placed a folder on the table. Effective immediately, she said, "I'm implementing a full brand transformation." The room went quiet. One executive cleared his throat. "What kind of transformation?" "The kind," she said, "that makes sure what happened at Store 47 never happens again. Not here, not anywhere." She laid out her plan. Mandatory equity training for all employees, including executives. A mystery human program where everyday people would test stores for fairness. New hiring practices prioritizing diversity, not just in color, but in background and life experience. Community days where stores would close early to host free style sessions for underrepresented customers. There were concerns, of course, questions about cost, about risk, about brand perception. But Diana stopped them with one sentence. If our brand can't survive kindness, it doesn't deserve to survive at all. Silence followed, then slow, respectful nods. Because when a woman who built an empire from scratch speaks with that kind of clarity, you listen. Meanwhile, Store 47 was now more than a location. It was a symbol. People traveled from neighboring cities just to walk through the doors. Not to shop, but to feel. To experience a place where luxury wasn't about exclusion, but about expression. A single mother named Jasmine came in one morning holding her daughter's hand. She didn't buy anything. She just walked slowly through the aisles, soaking in the warmth. When an employee approached her, she smiled and said, "We just wanted to see the place where everything changed." The staff smiled back. "Take your time. You're welcome here." That phrase, "you're welcome here," had become a new slogan quietly printed on every tag in store. No big marketing campaign, just quiet power. Even Helen Carter, the wealthy customer who had cheered Britney's cruelty, wrote a letter to Diana. It read, "I was wrong, blinded by status, pride, and old thinking. That day, I saw myself clearly for the first time. I hope I never go back to who I was before." Diana didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some growth doesn't need applause. Amber Davis, who had left to focus on social work, sent a photo to Carla, the new manager. It showed her standing with a group of high school girls at a workshop, teaching them about kindness in retail. The caption read, "We teach what we learn. Thank you for the lesson. Carla printed it out and pinned it in the break room. Back at headquarters, Diana stood at the top floor window one evening, looking out over the city lights. In her hand was the old wallet she had once carried, the same one Brittany had mocked, held together by tape and memory. She smiled. That wallet had never been about money. It was about reminders of where she came from, of who she was, of how easy it is to forget that everyone we meet is carrying something we can't see. As she placed it back in her desk, she whispered something softly to herself. Let the world sell fashion. We'll sell dignity. Because that was the new mission now. Not just to clothe people, but to see them. And the ripple that started with a slap had become a wave of change. IT had been exactly 3 weeks since the incident at Store 47. The slap, the smirk, the silence, and the storm that followed. The internet had replayed every frame. The news had moved on to other stories. But the impact had not faded. Something had changed in the air, not just inside the walls of Prestige Collections, but in the conversations people were having across dinner tables, offices, classrooms. And through it all, Diana Williams had said almost nothing publicly. Until now. The announcement came quietly on a Tuesday morning. Diana would speak. One time, one location. No media circus. No red carpet. Just a community event at the local civic center. Open to the public. No VIP passes. No front row restrictions. No dress code. Because this wasn't a fashion show. This was about truth. When Diana stepped on stage, the audience stood, not for applause, but out of respect. The kind she'd been denied just weeks earlier. She didn't wear a designer label. Just a simple navy blouse and slacks. She looked like someone's mom, someone's friend, someone's mentor. Because she was all of that and more. She walked up to the mic slowly. No notes. No teleprompter. Just her heart. And then she began. I wasn't going to speak today, she said, voice steady. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted the message to speak louder than the moment. She looked out over the crowd. Her eyes were soft but focused. But I've heard from so many of you. People who cried when they saw the footage. People who saw themselves in my silence. People who said, that could have been me. So today, I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for you. There was a hush in the room. When I walked into Store 47 3 weeks ago, I was dressed like I always am when I want to see the truth. Not the polished smiles. Not the fake greetings. But the truth that lives behind people's eyes. Her voice grew gentler. And what I saw was something many of us have felt our whole lives. That no matter what you've earned, no matter how hard you've worked, some people will always look at you and only see what they expect to see. She took a breath. But that day wasn't just about me. It was about every person who's been followed in the store. Every child whose mother was asked if she could really afford that item. Every man who's had to show 3 forms of ID for a credit card. Every woman who's been told, maybe try the sale rack instead. Heads in the crowd nodded. Some people wiped their eyes. And to those who say, well, if they'd known you were the owner, they would have treated you differently. That's exactly the problem. She paused, letting the truth land where it needed to. You shouldn't have to be a billionaire to be treated like a human being. A quiet chorus of yes murmured from the crowd. I built Prestige Collections not for the rich, but for the ready, the woman ready to believe in herself, the man ready to show up proud, the teenager ready to express who they are. I built it for people who understand that style isn't about price tags. It's about power, the quiet kind, the kind that lets you walk into a room and say, I deserve to be here. She leaned in slightly, her voice soft but sharp. But somehow, along the way, some of my stores started forgetting that. They started deciding who belongs and who doesn't based on hair, skin, shoes, accents, and assumptions. And for that, I take responsibility. Because leadership isn't about what happens under your watch. It's about what you allow to grow in your absence. There was silence again. But this time it was heavy, with agreement, not tension. So today, she said, I make this promise publicly. She held up her right hand. Prestige Collections will never again be a place where someone is made to feel small for being themselves. Not in any location. Not under any manager. Not under any policy. From this day forward, our brand will reflect our belief that true luxury is being seen, heard, and respected. The crowd applauded, but not loudly, not the kind of clapping you hear after a concert. This was gentler, deeper, like people clapping for something they knew they would carry home with them. Diana smiled, then said something unexpected. I want to invite someone up here. She gestured toward a woman seated near the back. Maria Gonzalez. Maria stood slowly, visibly stunned. She had come to support, not to be seen. But Diana was calling her for a reason. Maria, Diana said softly, you were afraid that day, but you've grown since. You've shown humility, reflection, and strength. And you've used your voice in ways that inspire others. Maria nodded slowly, choking back tears. You are living proof that change isn't just possible, it's powerful. And I'm proud of you. The crowd clapped again, louder this time. Diana closed her speech with one final thought. There will always be people who judge. But let that never stop you from walking boldly into the room. Because sometimes the ones they think don't belong are the ones who own the building. She stepped back from the mic. The room rose in a standing ovation. But not for the woman who owned a fashion empire. They were standing for the woman who had reminded them all that respect isn't earned through money, but through humanity. Months passed. The headlines faded. The hashtags quieted. The media moved on, as it always does. But what remained was the impact. Because some stories don't just go viral, they go deep. Into hearts. Into boardrooms. Into break rooms. Into how people speak to strangers in dressing rooms. Diana Williams didn't stop after the speech. She didn't slow down. She kept building. Not more stores. Not more profits. She built something harder. A culture. Prestige Collections became the first major retail brand in the country to require every new hire to complete a respect readiness certification before stepping onto the sales floor. Not because it looked good, but because Diana meant it. Other companies began copying it. News anchors called it the Diana effect. But Diana didn't care about credit. She cared about results. Store 47 became the company's flagship location, not because of its size, but because of its story. People flew in from other states just to shop there, not for the clothes, but for the feeling. They wanted to walk through the same door that had once tried to shut someone out, and now welcomed everyone with open arms. In the back of the store near the customer service desk, a small plaque was installed. It read, "This store once forgot who it was." Then a woman walked in, quiet and proud, and reminded us all, "Let no one forget again." In honor of Diana Williams. Visitors took photos next to it. Some cried in front of it. Others left handwritten notes taped beside it. Testimonies of moments they had felt invisible and how this story gave them the courage to demand better. But for Diana, the greatest reward wasn't the plaque or the press or the praise. It was what happened next. One morning, she received a package at her office. No return address. Inside, a simple envelope and a folded photo. The photo showed a small clothing rack set up at a community shelter. Folded clothes. Clean shoes. A handwritten sign above it read, "Everyone deserves to feel beautiful." Inside the envelope was a letter. "Ms. Williams, I was the man who laughed that day. I stood in that crowd at Store 47 and did nothing but laugh at your pain. I didn't know who you were, but I should have known better. I can't erase what I did, but I can do better going forward. This photo is from a shelter in my neighborhood. I help there now. Thank you for the lesson. I'll never forget it." Diana closed the envelope and held it close to her chest, because that's what this story had always been about. Not punishment, not fame, not revenge, growth. And it all began with one woman refusing to be small in a room that tried to shrink her. One woman who knew exactly who she was, even when no one else did. So what's the legacy? It isn't just the store, or the change in policy, or the millions who shared the story. It's this: that next time someone walks into a room in worn shoes and a taped-up wallet, someone will remember this story and pause. They'll think twice before judging. They'll offer help instead of humiliation. They'll see a person instead of a problem, because they'll know you never know who someone really is. She might be a stranger, or she might own the whole building. And even if she doesn't, she still deserves respect. Always,